Whenever you type a web address into your browser, do you ever stop to wonder what's actually happening behind the scenes? Or maybe more importantly, who is actually controlling the infrastructure that gets you exactly where you want to go? Well, welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to pull back the curtain on the internet's core infrastructure. We are going to demystify all those confusing acronyms, DNS, IANA, CCTLDs, and figure out who truly holds the keys to the digital borders we cross every single day.
So here is our roadmap for today. First, decoding the DNS. Second, DNS business and politics. Third, IANA and the root. And finally, number 4, managing country codes. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this with Section 1, decoding the DNS. Because to really grasp who runs the internet, we first have to understand the foundational layer that makes the whole thing tick.
Now, when we talk about the DNS, it is super easy to just think of it as that invisible thing that matches a website name to an IP address. But fundamentally, it's a globally distributed, loosely coherent, scalable, reliable key value lookup system. That's a mouthful, I know, but it basically translates one protocol object into another. It's not just mapping names to addresses. It could be translating a name into a load-balanced pointer, or an IP address back into a name, or even looking up a security certificate. It is absolutely the vital, globally distributed system that we all rely on to reference, well, literally anything online.
A lot of people call the DNS the phone book of the internet. Actually, scratch that. That's kind of the wrong way to think about it. The DNS is not some static directory where you just open a page and read a list. Instead, think of it more like a directory assistance operator. It's a highly dynamic, responding system. When you type in a URL, you're using caching resolvers, usually run by your internet service provider, to actively fetch data from published zones. So it's an active query and response, not just looking up a static list. And the sheer, staggering scale of this system, it's honestly hard to overstate. There are over 170 million administrative delegations out there. That means 170 million assignments of administrative authority over specific zones. In fact, the actual number is basically unknowable because of how vast and decentralized the whole thing is. And the craziest part is, the core technology running all this has remained largely unchanged since it was invented way back in 1983. To put that scale into perspective, just think about the number 100,000. That is the number of queries per second that the busiest servers report handling during peak times. Around the clock, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Sure, the average query is tiny, like 60 bytes, and the response is maybe 200 bytes, but when you multiply that by 100,000 queries every single second, you really start to grasp the monumental technical feat of the internet's daily operation.
All right, moving right along to Section 2, DNS business and politics. So we have this massive technical marvel, but you can't wire up the entire world without running into some human nature, right? Let's look at how the DNS functions as both a billion-dollar business and a heated political battleground.
Ever since the commercialization of the DNS kicked into high gear around 1996, this massive new industry called domaining was born. You can literally see the incredible, rapid growth of top-level domains like .com and .d. The idea spread like wildfire and created an ecosystem that accounts for hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. But as you'd expect, where there is money, things get complicated. This booming industry also ushered in completely new legal headaches, things like trademark infringement, fraud, and typo squatting.
And beyond the cash, the DNS is a venue where really intense international politics play out. Domain names are basically your literal presence on the internet, and sometimes that presence triggers deep international disputes. For example, we see territorial conflicts over delegations, like the debate surrounding .Quebec. We see domains acting as flashpoints for free speech arguments, with registrations like freetibet.info or walmartsucks.com. There are massive controversies over the creation of new top-level domains like .xxx, and ongoing debates regarding the U.S. government's historical role in root zone changes. So the DNS isn't just a bunch of servers. It's the digital manifestation of all our physical world's complexities.
So with all this money and all these politics swirling around 170 million delegations, how is this not just complete and total anarchy? Well, that brings us to Section 3, IANA and the root. The internet absolutely needs technical coordination just to ensure everything talks to everything else. If you visualize this as a giant tree, at the very top, you have the root, and branching down from there, you see the different categories. Country code top-level domains on the left, infrastructure domains, sponsored domains, and generic domains like .com over on the right. Notice how completely different groups are involved in managing these spaces, like the ISO 3166 for country codes and ICANN for generic ones. It's like a giant puzzle.
To maintain order across this massive tree, enter IANA. That's the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority. As their mission statement puts it, they are dedicated to preserving the central coordinating functions of the global internet for the public good. Basically, they're the definitive central coordinating body. They're responsible for maintaining the identifiers on the internet that absolutely, positively have to be unique for the whole thing to work. But here is something absolutely crucial. IANA's power is very, very carefully scoped. You have to understand the boundary between what they do and what they definitely do not do. What they do is maintain the data for the DNS route. That's the technical data and the social data, like admin contacts. What they do not do is set policy. They don't unilaterally decide what the two-letter country code should be, and they absolutely do not dictate who gets to run a country's top-level domain. They are technical coordinators. They are not digital emperors.
You can really see this careful limitation of power in how they handle changes. Routine technical updates, those are easy. IANA just confirms it's authentic, checks for technical bugs, and pushes it through. But reassignments, like actually changing who runs a domain, that is tough. For those, IANA goes through a rigorous process. Step 1, they perform a deep evaluation. Step 2, they submit it to the multi-stakeholder ICANN board for consideration. And Step 3, they implement it as appropriate. It's heavily vetted.
Which leads us perfectly into our final section, Section 4, Managing Country Codes. Let's zoom all the way down from that global international coordination to look at how specific country codes, those two-letter domains at the very end of web addresses, are actually managed on the ground. Like we established earlier, IANA doesn't just invent these country codes out of thin air. Instead, they rely entirely on the ISO 31661 standard. This is a UN-defined standard that nominates two-letter codes for countries and autonomous regions. There's a whole agency that makes revisions to this list, and ICANN is really just one of 10 members on that maintenance agency. So the literal letters assigned to a country are drawn from a totally separate, pre-existing, internationally recognized standard. But who actually gets to run that domain for a specific country? Well, according to the guiding document, which is called RFC 1591, an operator has to prove 4 key things. 1, they have to show they actually have the operational and technical skills to run it without breaking it. 2, they must be physically located in the country. 3, they have to treat the local internet community fairly and equitably, so no playing favorites. And 4, they have to demonstrate that they actually have the support of the local community and government to operate it.
I really want to highlight that second rule for a second, the local presence requirement. It is such a brilliant stipulation. By forcing the operator of a country's top-level domain to be physically located within that country's borders, the global internet inherently respects national sovereignty. It guarantees that the operation of that domain is entirely subject to local law. IANA appoints the operator, sure, but the local interests decide exactly how the domain is run within their own country. And because the system relies so heavily on these local operators, the administrative housekeeping is incredibly high stakes. IANA keeps records on who runs each domain. If an operator's local contact data gets out of date, IANA simply doesn't know who is responsible anymore, and that can cause absolute chaos if critical operational changes need to be made, or if there's some kind of technical emergency. So the golden rule, and the practical reality of keeping the internet stable, is that operators must meticulously maintain their records at whois.iana.org. Now, if an operator steps down or a big change in delegation needs to happen, that rigorous ICANN board assessment we talked about kicks in. This board, which is made up of stakeholders from all over the world, seeks documentation from current operators, local internet actors, and governments. But ultimately, they are laser-focused on answering 2 monumental questions before making any change. Number 1, does the request reflect in-country consensus? And crucially, number 2, does the application preserve the stability of the internet? Which leaves us with this final thought. We so often imagine the internet as this centralized machine controlled by a single, shadowy entity or some massive tech corporation. But the reality? The reality is far more complex, and honestly, way more fascinating. The core of the internet functions on decentralized coordination, standardized rules, and local sovereignty. So if the entire global internet relies on local consensus and distributed responsibility to keep functioning every single second of every single day, who truly holds the power over your digital borders? Something to think about the next time you type a simple web address. Thanks for joining me on this explainer today. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.